Welcome to Day 7 of Western Civilization. Today we'll conclude our examination of the expansion of empires. We're going to look at a region a little bit outside of our typical Eurocentric perspective, and we're going to focus on some empires that are in Central and Southwest Asia. These are going to be some Muslim empires that are going to grow and have significant influence on world history, and because of their general proximity will influence European history, or as we know it, Western civilization. Now, there are some notable locations that we've talked about in the past. Constantinople, in this section it's going to be renamed Istanbul, and we'll talk about why that happened. Notable people are going to be Osman Bey and Suleiman the Magnificent. Now, for today's lecture, we're going to focus predominantly on the Ottoman Empire. You'll be exposed to 3 different empires, and the reason why we're only going to really focus on one is because of their general influence with Western civilization at this point in history. So before we get into these 3 empires and before they emerge onto the scene, we want to talk about kind of the influence of Islam. Now, in the next unit, we're going to go a little more in depth about what Islam is and how it arose. But essentially, if I can give you the quick rundown, there was a prophet, his name was Muhammad. This is the region of the world that he comes into play, and his ideas, which will become Islam, essentially, are going to infiltrate the entire Arabian Peninsula and then into Central, South Asia, and eventually even into Southeast Asia, and currently the islands of Indonesia, and also North Africa. Now, people that follow Islam are generally referred to as Muslims. And so the 3 empires that we're going to look at today are referred to as Muslim empires because of their association with Islam. And again, we'll talk more about that in our next unit. So by the 16th century, Turkish warriors had transformed this Islamic region of the world. And essentially we see the emergence of 3 tremendous empires: the Ottoman, the Safavid, and the Mughal empires. Now, all of these great empires had humble origins, and they began as small warrior principalities. And again, here are the 3 that we'll discuss. The Ottoman, which is in, at this point, Eastern Europe, okay, this region here, Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey, and North Africa. The Safavid Empire is going to be centrally located in the modern state of Iran, which replaced kind of the ancient Persian Empire, and then the Mughal Empire is going to be in the Indian subcontinent. So again, just because of proximity, we're going to focus predominantly on the Ottoman Empire over these 2. However, your DBQ will discuss evidence and primary sources from all 3 to help kind of explain the influence of Islam on these Muslim empires. Now, initially, the Ottoman Empire was a frontier state, so it was kind of this periphery region on the outside looking in, and it was led by a guy by the name of Osman Bey. Now, Osman and his followers sought to become the Nazi, which essentially is a Muslim religious warrior. And through this devotion to Islam, this idea that religious warfare was the way to kind of expand, we see kind of an explanation for why these empires were able to grow so rapidly. And this is best epitomized by a selection from a poet of the times. And let me read this for you, and you just follow along with me. The Nazi is an instrument of the religion of Allah, which in this case is Islam, a servant of God who purifies the earth from the filth of polytheism. The Nazi is the sword of God. He is the protector and the refuge of believers. If he becomes a martyr in the way of God, do not believe he has died. He lives in the beatitude with Allah. He has eternal life. Now, this is really effective because a lot of these warriors were kind of absorbed into these kingdoms, and they're very cultured to be kind of warriors in a sense. And so by connecting this warrior mentality with this religious devotion, I mean, essentially you have a bunch of warriors that don't fear death. And if you don't fear death, well, what do you fear then? Certainly not earthly things. Now, the Ottomans were fantastic as expansionists. Okay, and eventually in 1453 they capture the city of Constantinople, and this capture is credited to Mehmed II. He's also known as the Conqueror. And by going into Constantinople after the Byzantine Empire was severely weakened, he takes the city because of its geographic point and economic significance to the region, and changes the name eventually to Istanbul. And another thing that Ottoman influence in Constantinople does is it kind of creates the foundation of a tightly centralized government. And really, this empire is going to last from 1453 all the way until 1918. And only because they chose the wrong side in World War I is the Ottoman Empire going to be disbanded and later divided into modern states. In this sense, most specifically, we'll talk about Turkey. And I'll show you a map here in a little bit. The Conqueror also had vast plans for conquest in Western Europe. In fact, kind of one of his objectives was to go and capture the Pope himself. He met resistance by going into Europe here, and after his death, a lot of his successors really abandoned these hopes of expansion that far into Western Europe. Ottoman imperialism climaxed during the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, as he was known in Europe. And as you can see by looking at this map, here is the traditional boundaries of the Ottoman Empire. And if we look at Suleiman, he's able to expand the empire, into the historic Fertile Crescent, also further into Eastern Europe, and further into North Africa as well. And one of the things that, if you take a look here, that is very advantageous for the Ottomans is its general proximity on the Mediterranean Ocean. And what this allows the Ottomans to do is become a very, very rich and effective naval force. Also to kind of govern a lot of their boundaries that were connected with the Mediterranean. So essentially what we see is that the Ottomans not only compete in Eastern Europe by land, but also via the Mediterranean come to kind of dominate the eastern portion of the Mediterranean. And using their location at Constantinople, they are at the economic hub of trade in the Mediterranean and the Black Seas. This is a image about a conflict that happened at sea, and you can see that the Ottomans were very, very good at siege warcraft on the high seas. Pause it, take a look at it, tell me what you think sometime. Alright, again you can take a look at this map, and what we see with this map is just the overall greatest extent of the Ottoman Empire, noted here in the light tan colors, and you can see North Africa, Eastern Europe, and also kind of this portion of what we refer to as the Middle East. And following, or up to the point of World War I, we can see that the Ottoman Empire really lost a lot of territory and was, for the most part, centrally located in modern-day Turkey and Iraq, and on the Levant. Now the Ottoman, the Safavid, and the Mughal empires were all military creations, and for the most part they were totalitarian states. The rulers commanded armies, they appointed officials at will, they adopted policies that they thought were just and righteous, and essentially they owned all the land as well. In addition to this totalitarian perspective, there was an extreme devotion to Islam, which encouraged a lot of these rulers to go to, and they were called to extend the faith to these new lands. Now connect this motivation to spread religious ideology with the Nazi ideal of spreading Islam through warfare, and you've got a very formidable force that a lot of these European states are going to have trouble with. Now eventually, as history has it, all three of these dynasties ultimately collapse. Between the 16th and 18th centuries, basically the 1500s to the 1700s, the Safavid Empire completely disappears. The mid-18th, the Mughal Empire in India was falling under the control of the British imperial rule, and later in this course we'll talk about British imperial rule in India. And in the 1700s, the Ottomans are starting to kind of withdraw from their climactic borders. And the reasons for collapse are no different from a lot of the other civilizations and countries that we've examined so far. infighting, competition between family members, incompetent rulers that focus more on spending than they do on state affairs, a lapse in expansion, their content, and an overall decline in military supremacy.